All right, everyone, if we could have everybody's attention. We're going to, as we do every Wednesday, or every time we do this Wednesday night Q&A, we're going to have the magic microphone. This is what allows you to speak. And we'll pass it around. If you have a question, you are welcome to ask your question. You can direct it to any one of us, or you can ask us all to give our opinion, of which we are all very good at doing. So Brother Gary's going to walk around, so I'll let him do that now.
Who has a question?
All right. Brian.
I guess this will go to Mike since he's teaching on it. But, you know, in Sunday school, they talked about the 24 around the altar, which we said that it's the 12 tribe representation, and then the apostles. But is that when we get to heaven, are we going to see that? We will see the apostles. I assume that all of those come to know Christ with the one that got 86, and then Paul took his place. But as the tribes themselves, what leader or how would they be representative? Is it safe to say that all the firstborns were of Jacob's kids really going to be the head of the tribe just by name or a face or the actual person? Or is that like just a symbolic of how John is talking to us at the...
And whatever he says, I agree.
And whatever he says, I agree.
Yeah.
I believe it's symbolic. I believe that the 12 tribes, like we think of Novelli asked, well, you know, there was actually 13 apostles. Well, that messes up the 12 part. So it's 12 tribes, 12 apostles, representative. Now, there are people that would disagree with my interpretation on that. Some people believe that you have, because the 24 elders that are around the throne represent the priesthood, because in 2 Chronicles... I think it's 2 Chronicles 24, somewhere around there, David separated the priestly duties into 24 courses. So I understand how they come to that conclusion. I just disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because of what they're wearing. They're wearing the same clothing, they have the same crown, the Stephanos, that is represented by already in the book where Jesus says, he who wears white, I will give him white garments who perseveres to the end. He who overcomes, I will put a crown on his head. He who perseveres to the end, I will give him the authority to sit with me on my throne next to my Father, who I'm sitting on his throne. So that's where I believe it's representative. When we get to heaven, are we going to see 24 elders sitting around on 24 smaller thrones around a big throne? No. I think that's just all symbolic because it's visionary. But one of these guys might feel differently.
No, I agree. The only thing I wanted to add was the number 12 is seen not only in Israel and in the disciples, apostles, but also in the table of nations earlier in Genesis. There are 12 nations that are mentioned. So 12 seems to have an indication of completion and representing something more than just that number. And so we have the 12. But I agree with Mike 100%. I think the 24 is the 12 Old Testament, 12 New Testament, bringing it together. But that number 12 is seen throughout the Bible in other ways.
Yeah, 144,000.
Yeah, which is I'm not bad at math, but it has something to do with 12.
So, when John was baptizing the people in the river before he baptized Jesus, where was people being baptized before that? Like in other, in history, people being baptized? Or was it, did John just start baptizing people at that point? And what was the point before that if there was people baptizing, being baptized before John started baptizing?
That's a great question. There are examples of cleansings and washings, but not the exact same thing that John was doing. There was something called proselyte baptism, which was when a person was brought into the Jewish community from outside, if somebody wasn't a Jew, that was practiced. But it's what John was doing was something that was new. It wasn't normative, because he was calling Jewish people to be baptized, repent and be baptized. It was the idea of cleansing is all throughout the Old Testament, but this idea of you need to be part of this was new and unique to what he was doing. Thoughts on adding to that?
It developed in the intertestamental time. Yeah. So they had the part that we don't have that's not written between Malachi and Matthew, basically, and we don't have any authoritative reasons why. But what John was doing was right. He was baptizing people that were professing repentance, which was new. That was something different that wasn't practiced in the Old Testament. It was basically, like he said, ritual cleansing.
It was something interesting. I know you and I agree on this with the.
Right, he might be able to hear you.
I know you and I agree on the in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. There was a pool there when they did the archaeological study of that spot where the scriptorium was, where they were writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. They would actually go through a pool of water as part of their cleansing for writing. And so there are those who believe, and I certainly think it's possible. Mike thinks it's very possible that John had contact with, and maybe even was part of the Essene community, which was an ascetic Jewish community that lived outside of Israel. So that's another part of it. Do you want to add your?
No, I do think it's new too, Chris, but there are those indications of, I thought of Naaman. Remember Naaman? He needed to be cleansed from his leprosy, and they told him to go wash in the river, right? And so I think there's indications of it, but I don't think it took place until John started to baptize them, and it really was a baptism of them professing to repent and turn towards the Messiah that would show up. Huh?
I know somebody has a question. Well, I do. Oh, I know you. All right, we know you do. We just wait until the end.
Well, I'll be waiting on people to, go ahead of me.
We're not talking about animals.
Thank goodness. Okay, so my question is, what is your opinions, or what do you know of about the 3 knocks of death?
K-N-O-T, not? Or
Knock. Like somebody knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks of death. You've never heard of it? So 18 years ago, my mother passed away on December 31st, 2006. And when she passed away, me and my daughter, whom at the time, 15, we went to the house, and my daughter was back in the bedroom, and I was in the kitchen, and we were gathering up stuff, because we're from Willacoochee, Georgia, so we have to take the stuff to the people to come and get it. Anyway, we heard 3 rapid knocks, bam, 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 and my daughter just called out, "Oh, Mom, I'm not dressed. Are you going to get that?" And I was like, "Oh, my hands are full, but yeah." So I'm going towards where I think the knock is coming from, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, that's the back door. And just as I thought that, I heard, "Gail?" And it was my mother's voice. And my daughter comes running down the hallway because I'm thinking, okay, I'm hallucinating. I'm having a nervous breakdown because my mother just passed. So I don't say anything. I just froze. And my daughter comes running down the hallway naked and is going to the door, running to go out. And I snatched her back and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? There's nobody there." And she said, "It was Grandma. Didn't you hear her? She's calling you." So I was just curious of what the 3 knocks. I mean, I've heard this before, but I mean, it was in a way that I mean, I wouldn't want to say here at church, but it's just something that I've held on to for 18 years.
I've never heard of it, so I can't make it.
Are you talking about the Grim Reaper?
That would be a good one. That's a good idea.
It's in addition to 5, magazine 12. I can't say I ever heard of that.
Have you ever heard of a story where somebody says that that when somebody passes, they've heard that person call for them and they just died?
No, and I just want to add, I've spent most of my life in and around the funeral business. I went to work for a funeral home when I was a teenager, and to this day, I still work basically on call with the funeral home if they need a minister. And I know that being in the funeral business, there's a lot of stories that people tell that things have happened.
Right.
But I don't have any way of verifying or not verifying anybody's story. I just know that there's a lot of things. Death is so mysterious. That's kind of the point I was just going to make. Because death is mysterious and death is something that we have a hard time wrapping our minds around, the fact that we're all going to die one day. I mean, when we really sit and think about it, it can be overwhelming. Even if we trust in the Lord and know we're going to heaven, just the idea that one day we're going to close our eyes and not open them back up is fairly fairly sobering, yes. And I think that there are times in different cultures and different things where something might happen, an experience might happen, and people think that's normative for death. One of the things you'll often hear people talk about the last breath. Every time somebody dies, they go, last breath. That's not exactly true. I've been in the room where people have died several times. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it just goes away. So their breathing just stops. It doesn't have a exhaustive last breath like we would expect. It's not always that way. So I think that there can be experiences that people attribute to saying, well, this must just be everybody's experience because this was my experience. But it's not necessarily. And I do think that sometimes we connect superstitions to our experiences, and that can happen as well. So it's part of the mystery of death. So that's as much as I could say about it. The reason for this is we're recording it.
Oh. So what are familiar spirits? What are they? You know the Bible speaks of familiar spirits? Familiar. Geez, let me look it up.
Get back to you later. Who's next?
If I remember correctly, that was the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's an Old Testament quoting. It just, you want me?
Yeah, you
In the Old Testament, you don't see demon possession. You don't see let me back that up. You don't hear that terminology. But in the Old Testament, you hear mediums, familiar spirits, that type of. It's not until you get into the New Testament that the actual demons, demon spirits, demonic spirits, evil spirits, that's when the terminology change. But I would say it's in the same scope. Yeah, same scope.
There's a couple places in the Old Testament where it calls them familiar spirits, depending on your translation that you're using too.
I was looking for familiar in the ESV and don't see it. That's why I was wondering what word.
No, look,
It might be evil.
Okay.
look in the.
If ESV says it's evil,
Yeah, it might be evil spirits.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it might even be in the King James. It's in the King James.
that's
and
what it is.
Might be
Y'all
in the New.
hitting me with King James questions and death. Everybody's coming at us hard tonight. Yeah. Is what it is. What's the verse? I want to look.
Leviticus 19:31.
Okay, hold on.
1931. Leviticus 19:31.
The holiness code.
Yeah.
Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I'm the Lord your God. So what is the word that's translated familiar?
Regard not him that hath familiar spirits.
Okay,
That would be
medium. A
mediums.
familiar spirit, a medium.
I think that's what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, he got it right.
Sorry. Oh, I should have answered that question. What is familiar spirit? Jeopardy.
I wasn't familiar with that term.
Yeah, I just remember from the King James.
Okay. I just,
It might even be in the New King James the same
you know,
way.
our church used to use the NIV when I was a kid. So, I know. I'm so far gone.
I always thought mediums were the people who like their steak a little red.
Y'all medium, I'm double X. All right, here. But that's that's how it's translated, I think. Okay. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Lancelot.
Put that down.
When Jesus asks, or when he's talking with the disciples, and he says that I don't pray for the world, I only pray for the ones that the Father gives me. Is he talking about just his disciples? Is he talking about, because when he says the world, does that mean is he talking about everyone? He only prays for his chosen, or does he pray for the vessels of destruction as well?
We're like a baseball coach. We're like, that would make sure we're all saying it. No, go. I thought you were handing it to me.
No, here, I'll hold it for you.
Okay, I've actually said this, and I'm going to say it again when I get to John 17. In John 17, when Jesus is praying the high priestly prayer, that's the prayer you're referencing, he says, I do not pray for the world, I pray for those whom you have given me out of the world, and for those who will believe because of their testimony. So he is praying for all those who will believe. He's praying for all of us down to us. He is, because he's acting as priest in that moment, he is praying only for those who would believe. He's praying for his own. And though he says, I'm not praying for the world in general, I'm praying for my own. These and those who will believe on me because of their testimony.
Yeah, and he actually says, and I pray that you not take them out of the world, which I think's very significant when we think that God will somehow protect us from harm. Like our soul's secure, but he says, hey, I pray that you would not take them out of the world, but protect them from the evil one which is in the world. I think your other part of that question was, is he praying for the destruction of the reprobate? Is that? No. He's actually, go ahead.
But he says that certain, in Ephesians we have vessels of glory and then vessels of destruction.
That's Romans 9, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't conflate two different discourses. You got Jesus' high priestly prayer, which specifically is dealing with, first and foremost, praying for the disciples as he is fixing to go through his crucifixion and his burial. Then once he's resurrected, he's praying that everybody that would, for the people that would believe because of them. Now, in the other passage you're talking about, those are two totally different ideas. And we don't see Jesus praying to the Father, at least not that I'm aware of, an imprecatory psalm, basically. Do you?
Not that I can think
Okay.
of. Maybe for the Pharisees. I
But
mean,
we don't-
not even a prayer.
That's not a,
but
yeah.
It's a rebuke.
It's a rebuke, but it's not an imprecatory in sense that you're praying to God to destroy them.
So you think about what he says in John 10? Remember that whole passage about the shepherd lays down his life for who? For the sheep. So again, it's that same thought that he came to save that which was lost, and those that are lost are the ones that were given to him by the Father. So, I mean, through that whole thing, through his whole ministry, especially in John, you see that there's a reference to his people over and over again without an imprecatory kind of thought to it. Because, well, I'll stop at that because there's a lot more that we could say about that.
Are you done?
I always got more I could say, but,
Yeah, that's-
I'll leave it be. It's good for now. That's like, I'm never done. I'm just waiting for the next round.
The parable of the untruthful manager, you know, where he goes to everyone his master has accounts with and says, "Oh, split your account and that'll be the new charge." At the end of that, there's two things I'm not really sure about how to make sense of it. When he says that the sons of light should be as cunning, and I'm probably paraphrasing, as cunning as the children of darkness. I mean, I kind of get the sense that he's talking about with that same cunning, do good as they do evil. But especially at the end when he says, so, because you know how that servant was doing that so that when he was poor, he would be taken in by all those that he helped out. When Jesus says in the end, so the sons of light need to make friends in this world so that when they're without, they will have friends that will take them in.
It's called the parable of the shrewd manager. I was just looking it up. I promise I wasn't texting.
No, that's cool.
Good.
Luke 16, 1 to 13, for those who are, maybe have their Bibles open.
Are you want me?
Do you want to do it?
Are you wanting to know who the sons of light are, or?
No, just what is exactly is he's trying to communicate? Like, I'll just go to something Charles Spurgeon said. He said, if we were as hardworking as as the demons and Satan, so he's talking about that work ethic. So that's what I was saying is like, is Jesus trying to say that we should have the same kind of cunning to do good as they have to do evil?
Well, I would say he's asking them to have if the sons of light had the wisdom of. He is making the point to where those that were in the darkness were not using skillful tactics, and that the sons of light are actually a group of people. Some believe Essenes. Sorry, if you disagree, but some believe those are the Essenes. So I'm still not quite understanding the actual question. Are you wanting to know what's the
I think I think that I think it is one of the more difficult parables in regard to who's in view and what's the point. But I think the overall point of the parable can be summed up in the phrase, be wise as serpent and innocent as doves, right? Christ would never command us to be dishonest, right? But he's using the example of this dishonest manager as someone who is wise, someone who is shrewd. Maybe that's the better word, is shrewd. He's shrewd in his dealings. He's shrewd in the way that he does the things that he does. And he's using that as an example. And he's saying, we are to be wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. We are not to be like a serpent. We're not to be snakely. We're not to be ungodly, but we are to be wise and cunning in the way that we do things. I think about guys like, not deceptive, cunning and deceptive, but you would agree with this, that when Scott is going to other countries, he has to be shrewd and he has to take his Scott, for those who don't know, and I know we have folks who may not know Scott. Scott is our missionary. Scott goes to Indonesia. Scott goes through countries where he has to, when he's bringing his Bibles along, he has to hide them so as to not have them taken away. He has to be shrewd in how he does those things. And I think that there is a sense in which we cannot be as wise as we should be because we are trying to be too fastidious. I'll give you an example from history. William Tyndale was called God's outlaw. William Tyndale was the one who translated the Bible into English from the Greek and the Hebrew. And he did so, and it was against the law. But he knew that the value of what he was doing was so important that it was worth doing what he did. And he was called outlaw, and he was burned at the stake for what he did. And yet we all hail him as a hero, right? Because he was doing what was needful, that the young man at the plow would have the same amount of ability to read the scripture as the person, the Pope. And I think that there is a call to action on behalf of Christians that we not be foolish, but that we be wise, and that we even be in that sense not deceptive but shrewd in how we manage these things.
Just real quick, think about it as you go read through the Proverbs. There's a lot in the Proverbs that talk about how we ought to be wise and how we ought to conduct ourselves in a way that we can promote truth and to some extent keep ourselves going. So you read through the Proverbs, all those sections about wisdom and how we ought to be cunning and we ought to be wise and we ought to be diligent and we ought to be thoughtful, right? But I think that enters into that conversation concerning that. Good.
More questions? No, I ain't.
The year of Jubilee. So when the year of Jubilee comes around, and I was reading it, and I'm just trying to. So, see how to figure out how to say this. Do the people give the property back that they have bought from someone else, and at that time it stays the people that initially owned it? Is it their property from that point on? And I've just, because it's, I don't know. Like I was reading it the other day, and I was just trying to comprehend because I can't remember what the words were for it because I don't remember stuff. But it's like you could almost like buy it back from the person that purchased it from you in the year of Jubilee. You know anything about it?
The year of Jubilee, everything was back. Mike.
It only matters because of the camera.
The year of Jubilee, everything went back to its original owner. Slaves were set free, all that. So if you were selling a piece of property, probably not a good idea to do it in the 48th year. That's being shrewd. Because if you sell a piece of, go ahead, I'm sorry. I'd have to read the whole, because the year of Jubilee was obviously, it was a real thing, but it was typological. It pointed to Christ being our Jubilee, giving us our inheritance, but setting us free. That's why he fulfills the year of Jubilee. But I'd have to read that whole section because there is more to it than just stuff going, slaves being set free and it going back to its original. What's that? Go ahead.
There is a couple sections that talk about kind of buying back. Yeah, but.
Well, is it under the redemption?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, which goes back to going the slaves. Like the kinsman redeemer? Yeah, but that has. Yep. but that would have to do with my marriage. This is actually codified in the Mosaic legislation as on the 49th year, on the 10th month, on the 7th day, they were to set everybody free, and all debts were to be canceled. So I'd have to go back and read to see exactly what you're talking about. I don't have my
It's
Bible.
about resetting the tribes too, giving them their property back.
Yeah, it was like give it that way. Nobody lost their inheritance. That was
They
the
had a lot. Yeah.
nobody lost their inheritance under the Mosaic legislation because it always went back to its original owner, tribe, clan. So my Bible's over there. I could go
And
get
there were
it.
times when it didn't get done.
They can't hear you.
I was actually gonna get you to say it. Yeah. The times when it didn't get done.
Yeah.
You talked about that. That's why I was giving it back to you.
Yeah.
You talked about, when you were in Daniel, you talked about the fact that.
Yeah, we have no record of the year of Jubilee ever taking place for at least 490 years. We have one small section in Nehemiah where I think it's in chapter 10. I think it's in chapter 10 where he talks about observing the seventh year of the 49th, something, and it makes kind of a reference to that, but never do we ever see the year of Jubilee ever, not one time, observed in its totality. Not even in intertestamental time, extra biblical writings, none.
All right, Gary, or Andy, did you?
No, I was just reading in Leviticus 25, and it talks about that. It talks about the land not being sold permanently, for the land is mine, God says, and you are strangers and sojourners. And in all the land of your possession you shall grant redemption of the land. If any of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possession, and if his kinsman redeemer comes to redeem it, he may redeem what his brother sold. And I'm not sure if that's what you were talking about, but that's in Leviticus 25. And it goes on and it talks about, again, like Mike was saying, what was to take place under that economy. And certainly, and then if you read through the rest of that chapter, it'll talk about the year of Jubilee. And I do think that point about maintaining the tribes was essential too.
Property lines.
Because and you remember even like how the half tribe of Manasseh, how the women came and said, hey, look, all the guys basically are gone, but we should get a piece of land, being the daughters. But yeah, you can read it in Leviticus 25, and the year of Jubilee.
All right, we got time for one more.
Jesse,
Who wants to be the last?
Jesse has
Jesse got one. Jesse gets one.
thing that you want to know about, that you asked me to ask about. So the question is, the devil is a fallen angel, right? He was cast out of heaven by God. So where does he get his power? Would God have cast him out and not taken his power?
Can I start and then? No, it's a good question, I'm going to say first of all, what we know about Satan is very little. And a lot of the passages that people point to say this is about the devil, or this is about the devil's origin, or this is where he came from. I mean, I've taught angelology when we did our systematic theology class for 3 years, and I said, I don't even know for sure if those passages are even talking about the devil, because it doesn't say that. And so a lot of the stories that we have in our mind, the devil was an angel in heaven, he was an anointed cherub, and he was cast out of heaven. Those stories aren't actually seen specifically in the text that people usually reference, which are in Isaiah and Ezekiel. Yeah. I'm more inclined to look at certain passages like in the New Testament when it says Satan fell because of pride. So like that gives us a reason. It's like, don't fall into the same sin as the devil who fell because of pride, right? Like, so we know he fell. We know he fell for the reason of pride. Those are the passages that I go to. I believe the fall of Satan happened in the garden. I think the action of Satan tempting Eve was his fall. And that's that's sort of a minority report. I don't even know if we all agree, and that's fine because there are times when we don't, and on things like this we can, but his action of the great fall that was supposed to have taken place in heaven, there's no record of that, but we have the record of what happened in the garden. He went into the garden, he tempted Eve, and brought about. Now, of course, he had all in his heart, or whatever you want to call it. Angels don't have hearts, but you know what I mean. In his being, he had already fallen in the sense of he had already rebelled against God. But the first act of rebellion we see of Satan is tempting Eve.
So he was an angel when he did that temptation?
He was a serpent when he did that, and I don't. Well, he's in the form of a serpent. He's in the form of a serpent. So again, we're asking a lot of questions about things that the Bible doesn't give us specific answers to. But here's what we know, and I'm gonna give you Billy Graham. Hope you're killing me. I'm trying to say. She's doing every time I move my head. Hope's. The story goes, Billy Graham's kids were singing that song. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart, right? And then and then later. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on a tack. Ouch, right? Like that's the second verse. And the story goes, Billy Graham stopped his children and he said, don't sing that. And they said, why? He said, because the devil is real. And he's not a joke. And he was trying to point out to his kids, we don't want to think of the devil as simply a joke. We want to realize he is real, he is powerful, he is our enemy, and he is out to devour as many as he can. So I've always kept that like in my mind when I think about how I talk to my kids about the devil, and I think about how I address the fact we know enough about the devil that we ought to be concerned. We ought to be concerned with what he's doing in the world. We ought to be concerned, but we also don't have to be afraid of him because we have Christ, right? And so those are the things I think about when I think about the devil. When it comes to his origin, there's too many question marks for me to give you a 100% answer on those things. I know he fell, and I know he still has power because God has a purpose for him to have it. Those are my thoughts.
So unless I'm misunderstanding you, in part, we're asking about where does he get his power from, right? I would say all authority comes from God, and God, in his purposes, allows certain things to take place. And you want to say allow or whatever you want to say it, but everything comes from God. What does anyone have that they haven't received? So, I mean, I thought that's what you were.
No, that was my answer to him when he originally asked it, and then he wanted to know a little bit more, and I went to look and couldn't find it. I was like, oh, well.
So I always, you know what I do when it comes to that? I always go back to Deuteronomy 29. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, and the things revealed to us and our children. I have a hard enough time with the things that are revealed, and sometimes I just can't get lost in the secret things. But I would say all power comes from God's hand.
Yeah.
With the magic microphone. Yeah. Okay. So Miss Janice and I, teach the children's Sunday school class, and last week one of the kids at this table that I won't name asked a great question, and they said, we were talking about Noah's Ark, and they said, why didn't God, after Adam and Eve sinned, and he said he was sorry that he made man, why at that point did he just destroy man altogether? Like, instead of that seed of sin that still lives inside, why did he choose to do? I mean, why did he do that? Like, why?
Why did he drown everybody?
No, why did he
drown everybody?
Yeah.
Because of his nature.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So the question was, why didn't he just kill everybody? Yeah. Because God's merciful, loving kindness, full of compassion. His mercies are every day. And because men as his image bearers had a purpose to bear his image, wiping them out would not have served his purpose for creating them. If he could, what he should have done is wiped Adam and Eve out right then. But why didn't he do? Let's even back up further, because he's